Okay, so let's jump right in. Today, we're looking at two worlds that honestly could not seem more different. On one hand, you've got the rugged, high-stakes world of discovering oil in North Dakota, and on the other, the polished, data-driven world of global investors trying to change how companies deal with climate change. So, what happens when these two totally different worlds crash into each other? Well, that's exactly what we're going to unpack today.
Wow. I mean, just take a second and picture that. Before they even got to the main event, the pressure was so great that oil just started bubbling up on its own. This quote really sets the stage, doesn't it? It captures that raw, almost untamable energy of the discovery we're about to get into. A discovery that honestly changed a huge part of America.
So our story really kicks off with something you hear about all the time, right? One person with one little hunch. We're headed to Parshall, North Dakota. And you got to understand, this wasn't some unknown spot. Companies had been there, they'd drilled, and they'd found, well, nothing. But then, one geologist comes along and sees something that everybody else just completely missed.
This timeline is just incredible when you think about the persistence here. I mean, for more than 20 years, that 1981 drill site was just a failure, a piece of paper in a file cabinet somewhere. But this geologist, Mike Johnson, he dusts off those old logs and sees something, a hidden clue. He manages to convince EOG Resources to take one more gamble, and in 2006, damn, it pays off, big time. Just look at that last number. By 2013, 65 million barrels of oil from a spot everyone had given up on. Just amazing.
Okay, so here's the real kicker. This wasn't just any old oil find. The oil here was super cheap to get out of the ground. The break-even price was only $38 a barrel. Now, to put that in perspective, the average for the rest of the Bakken area was around $62. So this wasn't just a productive well, it was an absolute gold mine. That one number, $38, is the reason Parshall lit the fuse on the whole boom.
And you can guess what happened next, right? The impact was just electric. Parshall wasn't just another win. No, it was the spark. It set off this total frenzy of drilling and money pouring in that completely remade North Dakota's economy. And it sent ripples all across the U.S. energy scene. So get that picture in your head, this raw power, this massive economic boom, and just hold that thought for a minute.
All right, because we're about to do a complete 180. I mean, a real hard pivot. We're leaving the dusty oil fields behind and stepping into the glass and steel boardrooms of the planet's biggest investors. And in this world, the driving force isn't rocks and oil. It's a really simple but incredibly powerful idea. Climate risk is financial risk.
And right at the heart of this whole financial movement is an organization called Climate Action 100+. What you're looking at here is the cover of their latest report. And what's inside is this really fascinating strategy, basically using the massive power of investment dollars to nudge, or, shove, the world's biggest polluters to clean up their act.
So who are these guys anyway? Well, it's basically a massive team-up of over 600 big-time investors. We're not talking small fish here. Think pension funds, the folks who manage your retirement money, and huge asset managers, the absolute giants of finance. And their mission is pretty straightforward. It's got three parts. 1, get companies to take climate risk seriously at the top. 2, get them to actually cut their emissions. And 3, make them be totally open and honest about all of it.
The big question, of course, is any of this actually working? Well, let's look at the numbers. Check this out. A whopping 91% of the companies they focus on now have board-level oversight for climate risk. That's a huge deal. It means this isn't some side project for the PR department anymore. It's an issue that the top dogs, the board itself, has to answer for.
Okay, so having the board pay attention is step one. But what's next? Transparency. And look at this. 81% of these companies are now on board with lining up their disclosures with the big international climate reporting standards. What that really means is that investors can now get clear, apples-to-apples data on climate risk, the same way they get numbers on profits and losses.
And this might be the most important one yet. A full 80% have now set actual long-term targets to cut their greenhouse gas emissions. This is the real proof in the pudding, right? It shows they're moving beyond just talking about risk and are now making concrete plans for the future. You can see the pressure turning into actual strategy.
All right, so we've got our two parallel stories, right? On one side, you have the wild, explosive oil boom. On the other, this quiet, steady pressure from the world of finance. And I know what you're thinking. What on earth does one have to do with the other? Well, get ready, because this is the exact moment where those two worlds smash right into each other. And the bridge, the link between them? It's one company,
EOG Resources. Think about it. On one hand, they're the pioneers who drilled that game-changing well in Parshall. They're the heroes of our first story. But on the other hand, because they're a huge oil producer, they're also a top target for Climate Action 100+. And check out what happened. In 2025, they set a pretty serious goal to cut their emissions intensity. In simple terms, that means they're aiming to get every barrel of oil out of the ground with less pollution.
So here it is, the big takeaway. The exact same company that was on the front page for starting this huge oil boom is now, at the same time, responding to pressure from its investors to deal with its climate footprint. This isn't some theory from a textbook. This is the modern economy, right here in action. It's that push and pull playing out right in front of us.
And you know, this EOG story isn't a one-off, not at all. It's actually a perfect example of a much, much bigger trend happening all over the world, where investors are having these direct conversations with companies to push for change. Let's zoom out and see just how big this has gotten.
This chart gives you a really good sense of where Climate Action 100+ is spending its time. And, no big surprise here, oil and gas and electric utilities are the two biggest slices of the pie. Together, that's more than half of all their work. But look closer. You can see they're also talking to companies in all sorts of other areas, like consumer goods and chemicals.
Let's take Unilever, for instance. I mean, we all know their products. They're a giant. With them, the investors focused on something a little different, lobbying. They wanted to know about the company's political influence on climate. And because of that long-term back and forth, Unilever actually did a full review of all the industry groups it belonged to. Now they're considered one of the leaders when it comes to being open about that stuff.
And you see the same pattern in the power sector. Over in Italy, investors sat down with the utility company Enel. And the result? Enel actually put out a super detailed plan. We're talking plant by plant for how they're going to shut down their coal operations. That's not just talk, that's a real strategic change that you can trace right back to those investor conversations. And honestly, the list just goes on and on. In Germany, you've got RWE closing down coal plants. Over in Asia, you've got huge steel companies for the very first time publishing roadmaps for how they're going to decarbonize. And in India, the country's biggest power company is investing big time in renewables. This isn't just a Western thing, it's happening everywhere.
So when you step back and look at all the pieces, from that one lucky strike at an oil well in North Dakota, all the way to these high-level meetings in boardrooms across the globe, you start to see a whole new picture of how business works today. And this quote here from the head of Climate Action 100+ just nails it. The two words that really jump out are sustained and consistent. This whole strategy isn't about a one-time protest or shouting from the sidelines. It's about the biggest owners of a company using their influence, patiently, year in and year out, to push for real changes in how things are run. So that brings us right back to where we started, at this crazy intersection of two powerful forces. And it leaves us with a big question. When investors talk, do companies actually listen? Well, I think the evidence we've looked at today, from that North Dakota oil field to all those corporate boardrooms, points to a pretty clear answer. More and more, they do. And that quiet conversation, which just happens to be backed by trillions of dollars, is doing more than just moving numbers on a spreadsheet. It's literally reshaping the global economy. Thanks so much for joining me.